What would you do if wild boars destroyed your farm every night? That sound always begins in the middle of the night. The crack of dry branches snapping apart. The sound of roots being violently torn from the ground again and again. And the sharp snap of barbed wire fences breaking under the force of wild boars. The farmer can only listen helplessly as thousands of dollars vanish into the darkness. The moment we received the report, we, the rapid response specialists from the Texas Wildlife Management Agency, set out immediately. In the back of the truck was the game-changer trapping system. Without wasting any time, the whole team immediately began checking every footprint and every patch of torn-up soil to trace the movement of the herd. The first trap location was a narrow, dry creek bed where the tight terrain made a small modular trap the only possible option. The signal flashed. Through the infrared camera, the entire herd had entered the trap, completely absorbed in eating the bait. After one deep, controlled breath, my finger pressed the trigger without hesitation, and the heavy steel gate slammed shut, tearing through the silence of the night. Not stopping at the first result, we continued checking the system and quickly shifted to the next target. The herd had already entered, but a few large males still hesitated outside, snorting and sensing something unusual in the wind. Waiting meant the boars inside would finish eating and leave, but acting immediately would allow the ones outside to escape. There was no perfect choice. I tightened my hand and decisively pressed the drop trap command. The gate slammed shut instantly. The boars outside vanished into the darkness in panic within seconds, while inside the cage, chaos erupted violently. Heavy bodies crashed wildly in every direction, slamming into the steel frame like waves hitting rock. The third trap point, deep inside the forest, had movement. The exhaustion disappeared instantly. This area was completely different because the wild boars here reacted with extreme aggression when cornered, forcing us to deploy a large circular trap. No sharp corners, no pressure points. The camera screen lit up, clearly showing a large herd gathering beneath the feeder, each one stepping inside without the slightest suspicion. The decisive moment had arrived. Both drop gates were triggered at the same time. The boars froze for a split second before their wild instincts took over. They ran in circles, colliding and crushing against each other, creating a sound of hooves mixed with violently shaking metal. Near the orchard, the boars here were extremely intelligent. They feared narrow entrances. Traditional drop gates became useless. The best solution this time was 2 fully suspended cage traps. No doors, no walls, no visible danger. The herd slowly moved in, cautious and suspicious, finding nothing unusual. The moment the last sow crossed the line, the drop command was confirmed. The entire heavy steel frame dropped freely to the ground. The boars jumped in terror, crashing wildly into everything in complete panic. But the solid steel structure held them in place. The gamble was over, and this time, we won completely. But did you know, behind every successful trap closure is an entire system calculated down to the smallest detail. We use flexible steel modules. Steel mesh is locked together with quick pins, and anchor stakes are driven several feet deep to withstand the force of hundreds of pounds of impact. During the first days, bait is scattered everywhere, so the herd loses suspicion. On the decisive night, the bait is placed only in the farthest corner inside the trap, forcing them to push their entire bodies into the fully secured zone. Only when technology and psychology work together perfectly can we reclaim peace for the fields. The moment we arrived at the site and stood beside the steel mesh, we could truly see how terrifying they were. Massive blocks of muscle, skin thick like armor. They carried diseases that threatened both livestock and native wildlife. Without allowing the herd's panic to continue any longer, we immediately carried out the final step of the process. Every handling procedure was done right there from outside the trap. No unnecessary, prolonged panic.
Yep, it's probably slick. Yep. You hear him in there?
Every wild boar captured is not simply another number on a report. It means fields saved, irrigation systems no longer destroyed, and an entire ecosystem protected from silent devastation. If you want to witness more fast-paced and intense control operations like this, don't forget to like and subscribe so you won't miss the next video. I am part of a wild boar control team in California. The call came in early in the morning. The landowner told me he could no longer keep the situation under control. The boars had returned for several nights in a row, and every time they left, the fields were in worse condition than before. When I arrived, the first thing I noticed wasn't the extent of the damage, it was the helplessness of the landowner. I immediately walked the property with him to assess the damage and plan how to trap the boars. We didn't set traps based on luck. We divided the area into three main points, the three directions the herd most often used to move through the land. I knew that if only one location succeeded, the rest of the herd would become more cautious. And once wild boars become wary, everything becomes twice as difficult. So that night wasn't about waiting to hear a single trap slammed shut. It was about waiting to see which trap the herd would walk into first. Near midnight, the first signal appeared. A small group moved into the trap area on the outer edge. They weren't very cautious, perhaps because that area had already been trampled many times before. When the first trap slammed shut, I knew the operation had begun. The sound of metal echoed through the night, and immediately the atmosphere changed. The ones inside reacted violently, but the locking mechanism held firm. We moved in quickly and handled the situation right there during the night. That was the first success, but I understood clearly that was only the outer edge of the herd. The main group had not revealed itself yet. Less than 30 minutes later, the second point signal movement. This time, there were more of them. They moved slower and more cautiously. Perhaps they had heard something. Perhaps their instincts had already warned them. The moment of waiting at the second point was far more tense. A few of them stepped inside, then stopped. They turned their heads as if ready to retreat. If the whole group had turned back into the forest at that moment, we would have lost our chance. Then a large one stepped forward. Not rushed, not panicked. It walked straight into the trap area. The others followed behind. When the trigger mechanism snapped this time, the reaction was far stronger. The entire steel frame shook as chaos spread across the area. We had to move quickly before the noise alerted the others. The second point was secured during the same night. Only then did I begin to realize the true size. But one area still had no signal, and that was the place that worried me the most. Point 3 was located deeper inside, near the main movement route. After the first two traps had sprung, this area remained silent. No signal, no movement. That silence made me more tense than the sound of metal clashing. There were two possibilities. Either the herd had scattered, or the largest part of it was waiting for a different moment. We decided to hold our position and not interfere any further. Near dawn, just as I started to think the night might end without any more developments, a signal appeared. Slow, but clear. A large group was moving into the third trap zone. This could have been the remainder, or the true leading group. But this time they didn't get caught immediately. They circled around, inspecting, moving in several loops. We couldn't risk triggering it manually. If it failed, they would disappear completely.
Finally, as the first light of morning began to change the sky, the automatic trap mechanism activated. The gate closed. There was no loud crash like the previous 2 points, but it was enough to hold them inside. We didn't approach immediately. We waited until full daylight, and when we returned, most of the remaining herd had been contained inside the third trap area.
Controlling wild hogs is not a race of numbers. It is a process of guiding behavior based on observation, patience, and an understanding of herd psychology. When people choose the right moment and minimize unnecessary interference, the control system can operate safely, effectively, and bring long-term value to both the community and the surrounding environment. Truly was a nightmare. Although I'm a specialist on a rapid response team for wild boar damage control in Arizona, I will never forget that day. Around 6 a.m., we received a call from a corn farmer about 20 kilometers outside the city center. He had discovered fresh signs of wild boars inside his fields and needed us there immediately. I knew it was another mission, but I had no idea it would become one of the most difficult operations I would ever face. After examining the tracks and damage left behind, I initially decided to deploy a small drop door trap, a single steel frame cage measuring approximately 1.2 m x 2 m. It's suitable when dealing with a small group of 2 to 3 animals. For bait, we place fermented corn mixed with grains and molasses inside. On the first night, we didn't expect much, so we didn't actively monitor the live camera feed. The next morning, we reviewed the footage. At 11:47 p.m., 4 wild boars were already crowded inside the trap. Each was about 1 meter long and weighed roughly 50 kilograms. Instead of feeling relieved, I felt uneasy. For animals in a small trap wasn't good news. It meant they were extremely hungry. And if 4 had shown up, there were certainly more nearby. I immediately went through all the camera data. Wild boars were appearing throughout the night from multiple directions, east side of the farm, south side of the farm. Just as I suspected, the number was shocking. They moved near the property as if it were their own territory, feeding freely, roaming confidently, and disappearing before sunrise. That's when I realized my first mistake. The small trap had underestimated the scale of the problem. The next day, I switched tactics. We installed large circular steel corral traps, nearly 40 meters in diameter and about 3 meters high. These traps were equipped with 2 one-way doors. The animals could push their way in, but once inside, they couldn't push the doors open to escape. This time, we didn't place the bait in the center. Instead, we scattered bait from outside the trap leading inward, creating a natural feeding trail that gradually guided them inside. Then we waited. Just after sunset, the herd began to gather around the trap. They were cautious at first. The new structure clearly made them suspicious, but the scent of food was stronger than their hesitation. One by one, they started moving forward. Then more followed. There were no loud noises, no sudden triggers to frighten them. I held my breath watching the camera feed. The door swung shut. No bang, no chaos, just a gentle push. And they were all inside. The additional traps we had placed began showing similar success. The system was working. 5:40 a.m. I arrived at the farm before sunrise, with fog still hanging low over the fields. From a distance, I heard metal clank, heavy breathing, rapid hoof movement. As I approached, I saw them. Dozens of wild boars packed tightly inside the steel enclosure. They were panicked. A sow ran frantically from side to side, searching for an escape. Smaller ones circled restlessly within a confined space. The entire cage trembled under their weight. That was the most tense moment. If the structure wasn't strong enough, they could break through. I checked every locking pin, tightened the securing cables, maintained a safe distance. The farmer stood silently behind me. 3 weeks of crop destruction, now contained inside a steel enclosure. Once the situation was under control, the transport phase was carried out quickly and in an organized manner, minimizing aggressive contact and maintaining a steady handling rhythm helped reduce stress on the animals. This step was essential to ensure the intervention was conducted safely and responsibly. Effective control measures are not based on force. They're based on understanding animal behavior. In wildlife management, the best outcomes come from patience, observation, and responsible intervention. The goal is always to minimize risk for both people and the surrounding ecosystem. Unbelievable. This morning, when I went to check the cage trap I had set yesterday, an unbelievable scene hit me. The drop door cage trap was twisted and bent in the middle of the clearing. To find out what had happened, I immediately reviewed the surveillance footage. Yesterday, a massive wild boar had charged straight into the trap, and just a few minutes later, it smashed everything apart before disappearing back into the forest. The trap was severely damaged. Standing there, staring at the destroyed cage, I realized something simple. The old method wasn't going to work anymore. And that was the moment I decided to switch to a wild boar corral net trap. The afternoon in Arizona felt strangely quiet. I chose an open patch of ground where the wild boars frequently pass through. It didn't need to be perfect. It just needed to be wide enough and enclosed enough so that when the trap dropped, none of them could break out. One by one, the net panels were raised, forming a large circular enclosure. Steel stakes were hammered into the ground. Sections of cable were tightened carefully. From a distance, it looked like a temporary fence. But in reality, it was a giant trap waiting to be triggered. In the center of the enclosure, I scattered bait. Not too much, just enough to make sure the entire sounder would step inside. Once everything was ready, I left the area before nightfall. From that moment on, everything would depend on the wild boars. Arizona at night sinks into near total silence. I watched the trap through the live camera feed, my heart pounding. After more than an hour of waiting, shadows finally began to appear in the darkness. They stopped at the edge of the trap. The lead sow took a few slow steps forward, sniffing the air as she moved. The others stood tightly behind her, waiting, cautious. The moment lasted only a few seconds, but time seemed to stretch endlessly. Then the lead boar took another step. The others began to follow. One by one, the entire group slowly gathered around the bait. The tension in the air grew heavier. And just when the whole sounder was finally inside, the massive net suddenly dropped. In an instant, the silence of the desert night was shattered. The entire herd panicked. Heavy bodies crashed through the darkness, hooves pounding against the ground. Some of them rammed straight into the net, as if one more blow could tear it apart. But this time was different from the cage trap the night before. The flexible net absorbed every powerful charge. Some of the boars spun wildly, searching for an escape. Others collided into each other, their cries echoing through the night. In the dim light, the entire herd looked like a single chaotic mass in motion. But after a while, exhaustion began to set in. The panic slowly faded. The wild boars were still searching for a way out, but the trap had completely closed. And this time, not a single one escaped. As soon as the sun began to rise, the handling process started quickly. This moment is critical. As temperatures climb, wild boars can experience severe stress or heat shock if the process is delayed. Every step is carried out carefully and under control, prioritizing human safety while minimizing stress on the animals. This is the final stage, the step that determines the true success of the entire control operation. Corral net traps are not designed for recreational hunting. They are part of a responsible wildlife management strategy aimed at reducing conflict between humans and natural ecosystems. By capturing an entire sounder in a single deployment, pressure on communities, agriculture, and surrounding ecosystems can be significantly reduced. More importantly, this method represents a clear shift from reactive responses to planned, proactive, long-term management.
Rising tension when wild boars force urgent action. On an ordinary afternoon in a quiet suburban neighborhood in the United States, the calm was suddenly shattered. Screams rang out from a small hair salon. Customers panicked and ran for their lives. Mirrors smashed, chairs flipped. And right there, in the middle of the room, stood a fully grown wild boar, weighing hundreds of pounds, terrified, out of control. This was not a movie scene. This was one of many real-life incidents recorded as wildlife, especially wild hogs, pushed deeper into human living spaces. Wild boars are nothing like domestic pigs. A full-grown boar can weigh anywhere from 200 to over 300 pounds. They're fast, highly reactive, and armed with razor-sharp tusks capable of inflicting serious injuries. When panicked or cornered, they can become extremely dangerous. Beyond the direct threat to human safety, wild hogs destroy crops, cause traffic accidents, and carry diseases that can spread to livestock and pets. Even more alarming is their reproduction rate. In a very short time, just a few individuals can explode into a full-blown sounder if left unmanaged. In the past, trapping or removing hogs one at a time was considered a solution. But with today's population size and breeding speed, those methods are proving increasingly ineffective. Wildlife management experts warn that removing only a few hogs often makes the remaining sounder more alert, while the overall population continues to grow. That's why planned, sounder-based management strategies are now being adopted. In many regions, modern trapping systems combined with remote camera monitoring are showing clear results. These systems allow operators to monitor hog activity in real time. Trigger traps only when the entire sounder is inside. Reduce risk to people. Minimize chaos and unnecessary stress. In Texas, one of the hardest hit states, entire sounders have been captured in a single operation, breaking the reproductive cycle before it can restart. Many landowners and wildlife specialists agree. When done correctly, wild hog control does not require reckless or dangerous measures. Boarbuster is one of the systems used across the US as a sounder management solution. The system is built on key principles: open traps that don't alarm hogs at first, remote activation once the full group enters, continuous camera monitoring, maximum safety for surrounding people. This point matters most. Wild hog control is not about sport hunting or violence. It's about protecting people, property, and ecological balance. No one wants animals to suffer, but when a species grows beyond control and becomes a direct threat to communities, doing nothing can lead to far greater consequences. This is no longer just a problem for remote ranches. It's happening in neighborhoods, backyard fences, and places where children play. Without proper management strategies, wild hog numbers in the US will continue to rise, bringing greater risks to both people and the environment. Yet, there is hope. When communities understand the issue, when local authorities and residents work together, and when technology is used responsibly, real progress can be made. After trapping, transport is considered the most critical phase of wild hog management. Every step is carried out carefully and in an orderly manner, with stress and injury risks kept to an absolute minimum. Each hog is guided into reinforced transport crates designed for maximum safety. Every movement is planned, deliberate, and calm, avoiding panic and injury. This is not simply about moving wild hogs. It's a lesson in how humans can manage and coexist responsibly with wildlife. From sudden suburban encounters to responsible management efforts in states like Texas, one message becomes clear. Wild hog management is no longer optional. It is essential for community safety. The actions we take today will determine how safe our environment is tomorrow.
All in the middle of the night shattered the silence. Just 3 short words. It's all gone. I drove my Gladiator along the dirt tracks leading back to my uncle's farm. What lay before me was no longer the lush green of cornfields ready for harvest. Instead, it was a field severely devastated. Corn stalks lay flat. Young ears were chewed apart and scattered everywhere. My uncle stood there, silently watching the work of an entire season disappear. Every traditional method had failed. Electric fences had been smashed down. Noise and lights were nothing but a joke to this clever herd of wild boars. They moved like shadows, waiting patiently for the slightest weakness. It was time for a more systematic management approach. We didn't rush into control efforts for the sake of results. This was a long-term effort to restore peace to this place, including my uncle's family life. The entire morning was spent working with nearby landowners and reviewing local regulations. Permits, restricted zones, livestock protection measures, everything had to be completed properly. A mistake would not only lead to failure, it would also be irresponsible. Every action had to remain within the law and follow responsible wildlife management practices. Then came a reconnaissance phase. For 7 consecutive nights, we did nothing but observe through infrared lenses. Footprints, mud patches, movement hours, every habit of the wild boars was mapped and recorded. Our goal was to control and manage the herd scientifically, protecting crops, livestock, and community safety while minimizing unnecessary risk. Next came the most patience-testing stage, pre-baiting. There was absolutely no room for cheap tricks. We used clean fermented corn, a scent no wild boar can resist. By creating a consistent feeding habit, we could gather the herd in an orderly way, preventing environmental disturbance and reducing the chance of them moving to other farms and causing new damage. Day 3, they only stood at a distance, sniffing cautiously. Day 5, the boldest ones began tasting. We kept observing until day 10. Hunger had defeated caution. They returned again and again, treating the place like their own safe dining ground. And when wild boars lose their guard, that is when the smart traps enter their waiting state. That night was the decisive moment. Camera systems streamed live footage back to the control center. We had deployed a network of traps suited to each terrain and herd size. In the large open field, a massive corral trap waited silently. Near the forest edge in a narrower area, a solid hexagonal trap stood ready. And along a narrow trail, a box trap sat firmly in position. Every trap in the system had been selected for safety, durability, and the ability to hold the herd steadily without causing unnecessary harm. The herd began entering the bait zone, dark shapes filling the monitor. My finger rested on the trigger button. My heart matched the rhythm of the footsteps. But I waited. A few were still wandering outside the perimeter. If I triggered the traps too early, they would escape and become far more cautious in the future. So I held my breath. Finally, hunger won. Now, the circular trap gate slammed down. On the adjacent screens, the hexagonal trap and box trap were also triggered as the herd moved fully inside. The sound of metal crashing echoed through the night. Once the system was activated, the herd reacted instinctively, moving intensely inside the trap zones. Thanks to the strong, standard-compliant design, everything remained under control. These traps were built to maintain stability under all conditions. The strength of steel became a shield protecting the peace of the fields. The full herd control strategy had succeeded. The efforts of the entire village were finally protected. After tonight, the village could sleep peacefully again. My uncle and I drove the Gladiator through the night before the site, but we didn't go there to celebrate. This was the moment to collect the most important data: the exact trigger time, the number of individuals captured, and the movement routes the herd had just revealed. Protecting crops is a community effort. These findings would be shared with neighboring farms so they could adjust their own strategies, because wild boars constantly move across different lands. And so tonight, the cornfields were finally at peace. Tomorrow morning, when the sun rises, a humane processing procedure will be carried out in accordance with biosecurity standards. Protecting the environment, safeguarding livestock, and ensuring human safety always remain the top priorities. Because in the end, our goal is not just to react day by day. It is to build a long-term management system, responsible population control, proactive monitoring, and ecological balance. That is the sustainable solution for protecting crops and ensuring a safe coexistence between humans and nature. It truly was an unforgettable experience. Even after more than 20 years working the peanut fields in Texas, I still shudder when I think back to that morning. At first light, I was out patrolling the edge where the farmland meets the forest. The ground had been completely torn up, roots ripped apart, animal tracks stamped densely across the soil. I knew I couldn't delay any longer. A full-scale containment plan was set into motion. The challenges closing in felt far beyond anything I had ever faced before. I started with the most traditional methods: one-way steel cage traps and small drop traps. The location was carefully chosen, the edge of dense brush, where deep tracks pressed into the still wet mud confirmed the presence of wild boars. The trap itself was modest in size, about 1 meter wide and nearly 2 meters long, designed only for single targets. Golden corn kernels were scattered with precision, forming a trail that lured them from the narrow entrance all the way to the darkest corner inside. After days of conditioning them, the result fell far short of expectations. Only a single, solitary boar was caught. These small traps quickly revealed their limitations. When I reviewed the camera footage from one of the drop traps, my heart sank. The boars had indeed shown up. They approached slowly, cautiously, even stepping deep inside the trap. But only a few were captured. The rest lingered just outside the perimeter, watching their trap companions with cold, unreadable eyes before slipping back into the darkness. The plan had completely failed. I had no choice but to adapt. I switched to a larger drop trap system. At around 4:30 in the morning, a sharp, hollow sound echoed. The gate slammed shut, but once again, disappointment followed. Only one had failed to escape. The boars had grown smarter with every close call. This confrontation was becoming more intense than ever. Refusing to back down against their cunning, I shifted operations to the eastern wetlands, a low, damp area rich with activity. A massive steel enclosure was constructed, reinforced with a solid frame, measuring up to 4 by 8 meters. It was large enough to contain an entire group. The bait, rich with strong scent attractants, began to take effect. These were dominant males, over 100 kilograms, with massive builds and hides as tough as armor. Hunger began to dull their instincts. Greed slowly overpowered caution. Step by heavy step, they moved deeper into the trap, unaware that the final gate was already waiting. 2:35 a.m. The alarm device vibrated relentlessly in my hand. I slammed the gas pedal, and my Jeep Wrangler pickup tore through dense brush, ripping apart the night mist. The tension was overwhelming. As I got closer, I raised a high-powered flashlight and aimed it straight into the center of the trap. Inside the cage, pairs of glowing eyes reflected back, fierce, aggressive. Low growls rumbled as a warning. Seeing that, an overwhelming sense of relief washed over me. All the worry, exhaustion, and sleepless nights of waiting had finally paid off. Dawn began to break, the fog slowly lifting. I moved deeper into the forest to check the secondary traps set along a dry creek bed. What appeared before me was pure chaos. For wild boars were completely trapped. An old sow weighing around 80 kilograms, along with her growing offspring, crammed into the tight space. They lunged repeatedly at the steel mesh, their long snouts slamming hard against the frame in desperation. Every attempt to dig their way out was futile against the reinforced locking system and dense steel wiring. Building on previous experience and success, an open plain near the edge of an oak forest, I decided to deploy my ace card, a modular smart trap system. White steel panels, tightly connected yet highly flexible to assemble and adjust. An entire family of black wild boars, from aggressive dominant males to half-grown juveniles, was now fully contained within the steel enclosure. The most destructive intruders had been completely subdued, a decisive victory for persistence. The final phase, transport, began with absolute focus. A specialized trailer over 4 meters long was backed tightly against the exit gate of the trap, forming a continuous passage. My partner and I stood on both sides, holding the guiding panels firmly in place. The sliding gate opened. The Boars, cornered, had no choice but to surge forward onto the trailer. The final lock snapped shut. The entire destructive herd had been removed from the farm, restoring peace to the fields. This battle against wild boars was never just about strength. It was about the combination of modern trapping technology and the resolve of the farmer. Understanding behavior, patient observation, and decisive action. Those are the keys to protecting one's livelihood. As the vehicle disappeared beyond the tree line, I knew I had fulfilled my duty to protect this land with full responsibility and determination. In this area, wild boars are no longer a rare story. Local authorities have repeatedly recorded their frequent appearance around farms, even issuing recommendations for population control to limit ongoing damage. When we arrived, what we saw made it clear that the problem was far from small. The ground had been torn into long strips, and the forest edge was covered with overlapping tracks of both large and small animals. But in situations like this, acting hastily often leads to mistakes. Any control measures must be carried out properly and in accordance with regulations. So before anything began, we worked with local authorities, completed the necessary permits, and agreed on a control plan using net traps. Only after everything was approved did the plan move forward. The first step was not setting up the net immediately, but carefully surveying the terrain. We selected an open patch of ground located directly along a movement corridor, with a line of trees behind it to block visibility and enough open space in front for the herd to enter naturally. Once the location was finalized, the team began assembling the trap frame. Posts were driven deep into the ground, and the lower edge of the net was firmly secured to the soil to prevent it from being pushed up. Every detail was checked twice. Even a small gap could allow the entire herd to break free within minutes. When everything was finished, the trap door was left open. We then began the baiting phase. Camera footage recorded an adult boar approaching the trap. It moved slowly, sniffing the air before cautiously stepping inside. Everyone held their breath. Then the trap was triggered. The net closed quickly and cleanly. The boar panicked, turning around to search for an escape, but there was no opening. Just one animal, but enough for us to confirm that the trap structure worked exactly as intended. It was an important test. That success helped us finalize the formula for the first trap. Once we were confident in the system's stability, we continued building additional traps in areas where signs of destruction were most concentrated. Each location was adjusted to fit its terrain, but the core principles remained the same. On a known movement route, natural visual cover nets firmly secured several nights of baiting before activation. Everything was done quietly and patiently. Then night came quickly. At the eastern trap, Thermal cameras recorded several adult boars appearing first. They walked straight in, as if already accustomed to entering to feed and leaving afterward. When a number inside was sufficient and no individuals remained outside, the net was triggered. Heavy footsteps pounded the ground as soil sprayed into the air under the infrared glow of the cameras. Solid bodies slammed into the edges of the net, shaking the entire structure. For the first few seconds, everything was chaotic, but the structure held. Several adult boars were now contained inside. This place had been ravaged by wild boars many times. Fields were torn apart, fences broken down, and the damage repeated season after season. Small traps only managed to catch a few animals, while the rest of the herd quickly learned to avoid them and became more cunning with time. We could no longer deal with the problem in scattered ways. Together with the farmers in the area, we agreed to build a large trap, strong enough to capture the entire herd at once. It was a collective decision by the whole community to put an end to the long chain of destruction. As evening approached, while the sunlight was still strong enough, we began building the trap. Heavy steel mesh panels were carried out and assembled into a tightly sealed circle. Each joint was tightened carefully and driven deep into the dry ground. The sound of hammers striking metal echoed sharply through the quiet air. From the outside, it looked like nothing more than a cold iron frame. But in reality, it was a giant lock waiting for the right moment to close. Once the trap enclosure was secured, we installed infrared cameras around the area, mounting them high on tree trunks to monitor the entire trail leading inside. Everything was done quickly and carefully. We minimized human traces and left early so that our scent could fade away in the wind. The final step was baiting the trap. Bags of corn were opened, their sweet scent drifting through the late afternoon air. We scattered the corn to create a faint trail leading gradually toward the center of the trap. The middle was where the bait was placed the heaviest. Step by step, the herd would be drawn deeper inside without realizing it. When everything was finished, the trap area fell silent again. Only the faint smell of corn lingered in the night. And somewhere in the forest, sensitive noses had already begun to catch the scent. When night fell, the forest seemed perfectly still, but none of us truly felt at ease. Then suddenly, movement appeared on the screen. The wild boars had arrived. The large lead so stepped forward first, sniffing the air as she followed the scent of corn. One by one, big and small, the rest of the herd slowly moved toward the trap. Wild boars possess powerful survival instincts and sharp awareness of their surroundings. But tonight, hunger and the sweet smell of corn outweighed any danger they might have sensed. Guided by the leader, the others followed behind. Without suspicion, without hesitation, they rushed in to enjoy the food. When and we were certain the entire herd was inside the trap. Suddenly, bang! The final watcher triggered the drop gate. The sharp crash of steel echoed across the forest. In that instant, the quiet woods exploded into chaos. The wild boars panicked, charging in every direction, slamming into the steel fencing, colliding with one another as they tried desperately to escape. The ground was torn apart beneath their powerful hoofs. The mesh walls shook violently. The strongest boars attempted to ram the fencing with brute force, but it was all useless against the sturdy, carefully designed steel enclosure. The elasticity of the mesh pushed the powerful animals back each time they lunged. Some of the smaller boars tried to climb or leap over the barrier, but the height of the fence stopped them every time. Panic spread through the herd as they realized they were completely trapped inside a steel prison. In that moment, no one in our group dared to breathe too loudly. Everyone understood. This was a confrontation between the wild survival instincts of the boars and a plan carefully designed by humans. Before dawn broke, we approached the trap. The boars were no longer thrashing wildly as they had during the night. Many were exhausted, breathing heavily. Some stood quietly, their legs heavy with fatigue. Yet their instincts still pushed them to run whenever they sensed movement. Seeing the herd of more than 20 boars captured at once, the farmers finally let out a sigh of relief. Before opening the trap, the team checked every lock and joint again to make sure the structure remained secure. They carefully observed the animals to ensure the herd would not erupt into panic again. Each boar was restrained, following proper safety procedures. Specialized tools were used to prevent injuries, both for the people involved and for nearby livestock. The wild boars were then loaded onto trucks for further handling. Part of the harvest would be shared among the community according to prior agreement. The rest would be processed according to local regulations, ensuring disease control and environmental safety. After everything was finished, the surrounding area was checked one final time. The forest was returned to the quiet state it had before. And when everything was over, everyone understood that the success of a night did not come from luck or individual strength. It came from choosing the right plan from the very beginning. A large net trap, placed in the right location and strong enough to hold an entire herd, prevented the need for countless scatter traps, the kind that only lead to repeated failure. No one forgot that deeper in the forest, there were still other wild boars. But the events of that night had proven something important. When people stand together and choose the right solution, they can protect their crops, reduce damage, and keep the community safe.